My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of Earth's earliest patriarchs and prophets, collected in this book, Survivors of the Dark Rebellion, God's Heroes from Adam to David. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words Parental Guidance Recommended.
Chapter 3 Sheena. The first cry of Sheena delighted me far more than even the birth of baby Cain. For though Cain was the first baby human, Sheena was mine. Those of us whom the Almighty One had assigned recording duties had all been faithfully chronicling the activities of Adam and his wife Eve. Now, as they started to produce children one by one, we received specific assignments. And Sheena was mine. I watched her every choice with delight as she grew, though it was overshadowed by the knowledge of how much better her life would be had Lucifer not taken over this new world. Trying not to think about the second greatest grief I had experienced, I concentrated all of my energy on the human child. "Cain! Cain! Wait, I have something to show you," she called as she ran after her older brother. Turning, he smiled at her. Sheena adored him. She raced down the path carrying a huge basket. "Here, look at this one," she said. "I just finished it. It's so much better than the last one. Now you can pick your fruit and put it in this. That way you can carry more at a time." "I like the last one you made for me," he replied. The girl wrinkled her nose. "I know you did," she said, "but it was warped on one side. After all, it was the first one I'd ever done." "It carried fruit." "Yes, until the handle slipped out and your fruit rolled all over the ground." They both laughed. "This one is much stronger," she said, "and it's bigger too. You can carry more." "Come with me then. You can help me pick the fruit, and I'll carry it back." The girl skipped along next to him. "What kind of fruit are we going to get today?" "Oh, you'll love it. They're big and juicy, with soft, sweet orange flesh on the inside. I call them mangoes." "Oh, they sound wonderful. You're such a good gardener and seem to have something to harvest from the garden for us to eat almost all the time." "It comes from careful planning," he said. "I spent a long time just learning about the seasons for each of the fruit trees and the other food-bearing plants. The secret is that once you know their seasons and their cycles, you must plant some of each so that there's always something ripening. Then we will always have food for the family." "You're so smart, Cain. You must take a lot more brains to be a gardener than just to take care of sheep, as Abel does." He smiled at her. "Yes, sheep have their own problems and they smell funny, but our brother seems to like it, and someone needs to care for them." Sheena skipped to catch up with him. "I guess so. Still, who'd want to eat a sheep?" Cain laughed. "Not me. Besides, Abel would get upset if we tried to eat his sheep." The girl laughed with him. "That's true. He really loves them, and they are useful for their soft wool. Mother's making something for the new baby just today out of some of the wool." And that and the fact that we have to keep him around, so we have something for sacrificing to God. "Each time we go to the gates of the garden, we have to take a perfect lamb and sacrifice it on the altar." Sheena lapsed into thought for a moment. I hate it when we do that." Cain glanced at her. "You do?" "I hate having to kill that poor little lamb." "It's not the lamb's fault. It's our parents' fault. If they'd just listened to what God said, we'd still be living in the garden, and then Abel wouldn't have to tend sheep. Mother and father didn't need wool when they lived in there. At least, that's what they tell us." "They didn't wear anything?" "Nope," he said, "and they were happy that way. But we have to wear clothes, since we have had to live outside the garden." Sheena said, thinking again. "If it had been us in there," Cain continued, "you and I would have just done what God said in the first place. I mean, everyone knows snakes can't talk anyway. We would have known something was up, and then we could still live there." The girl sighed. "I wish they had." "Well, this basket's about full. Let's head back." "Supper is going to be great tonight," she said. And they hurried home. "Sheena," Cain called, "come with me." Where are we going? To Eden's Gate. It's time for a weekly sacrifice. Her forehead puckered into a frown. Where's your lamb? I'm not taking a lamb this time. You'll like this. He lowered the basket she had made for him. It held some of the most beautiful, most perfect fruit she had ever seen. Oh, those are lovely, Cain. Are you going to trade those to Abel for a sheep? No, I'm going to offer them to God. But... I know, we usually give him sheep, but if I offer him fruit, then no innocent little lamb has to die for mistakes it hasn't made. I can just offer the best of what I do, and you won't have to see a little lamb die. It sounds good, Sheena said cautiously, but it's not what God asked us to do. But he's the creator, so I'm sure he'll appreciate being honored with his handiwork. I don't think this is a good idea, the girl protested, but she followed her brother along the trail. When they arrived at the gate to Eden, Abel was already preparing a lamb on his altar. What are you doing, Cain? He said when he saw the basket. You know, God asked us to sacrifice a lamb. Mind your own business, his brother snapped. But you can't just do things your own way and sacrifice anything you want. God was specific about what he wants us to do. We need to be obedient to him. Mind your own business, Cain repeated, firmly and distinctly enunciating each word. It's not what we're supposed to be doing, Abel persisted. I'm going to tell Father. Cain turned his back to his brother and continued to arrange his fruit on the altar. I shook my head. The very son who insisted that he would never have fallen for Lucifer's temptations now considered his opinion equal to that of the Most High. Yet what he was doing was even worse. For the sacrifice of the lamb looked forward to the plan the Almighty and his Son had put into effect. It pointed to the sacrifice of the Son, his life in exchange for that of the humans. The sacrificial lamb symbolized the Son's perfection offered in exchange for their sinful disobedience. In effect, Cain was saying that the works of his own hands were just as good as the symbolic perfection of the lamb. I shuddered. How would the Almighty respond to such blasphemy? With the sacrifice of the lamb, he always showed his acceptance by burning the creature on the altar. Would he strike Cain with fire for his disobedience and disrespect? Breathlessly, I watched with the other recorders to see what would happen. The flames from heaven struck Abel's altar and consumed the lamb. Although Cain remained before his altar, nothing happened. As he waited and waited, the fire burned out on Abel's altar, and the younger brother rose to his feet. Cain stayed on his knees, staring straight ahead. I told you, Abel whispered. Cain's jaw clenched tightly. Sheena grabbed Abel by the arm. Stop it, Abel. Go away. Leave him alone. The brother turned and walked up the path. Sheena knelt by Cain for a few minutes, but he ignored her. The anger around him was so real she could almost touch it. Quietly she stood and slowly walked away. Abel was right, she thought. God has asked for a lamb, and obviously he didn't want fruit, or he would have honored Cain's sacrifice with fire too. She shook her head, deciding that Cain's plan had been a bad idea. I shook my head too. Sheena had no idea how terrible Cain's idea was. Oh, Cain, there you are, Sheena exclaimed a little later. I've been looking everywhere for you. He stood in one of his fields, staring at the ground. For a moment he looked up at her, then back at the ground. She ran over to his side. What's the matter? Are you still feeling bad about... Her words stuck in her throat. Oh, Cain, what happened? They both stared at their brother lying on the ground, blood pouring from a wound in his head, soaking into the freshly tilled earth. Numbly, she knelt and touched Abel. He didn't move. Is he... Can people die like sheep? She asked. Cain nodded. I think so. At least, he's not breathing. I think life has left him. Oh, Cain, Sheena whispered, shuddering. Did you... Her brother looked at her. Oh, Cain, she sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck. What are we going to do? He pulled her gently from him. We aren't going to do anything. You are going to go back home to our parents and keep your mouth shut. I'm going to get out of here. Where will you go? You need shelter. You need a family. But right now I need to get away before Mother and Father find Abel. Remember how much they grieve over every dead lamb, every dead flower? I don't know if they'll be able to bear this. Oh, Cain, she whispered. Come back when it's better. I will miss you. Then she flung her arms around his neck again before running toward home. I turned to follow her, sensing the presence of the son. How I wanted to hear what he was going to say to young Cain. However, having been assigned a duty, I followed Sheena. Slowly, Sheena filled her basket with mangoes from the tree that Cain had planted. It had been several seasons since that horrible day when he had left. She shuddered just thinking about it. Their parents would probably never get over it. In a way, that day they lost both their sons, for God had banished Cain from the settlement. Squaring her shoulders, she took a deep breath. What God had done was just and fair. The whole family recognized its justice, but she missed Cain. God had told them all that he had put a mark on him to protect him, and that no one should try to kill him to avenge Abel's death. It gave her hope, although she wasn't sure that Cain would be able to accept the forgiveness God offered. She wondered if he had built an altar to God wherever he was now, and if he ever offered lambs. As she reached for another mango, she heard a voice from the tree. Sheena. Startled, she jumped and stepped back. She knew about voices from trees. Mother had told her many times about the serpent and how it had deceived her into disobeying God. Sheena had always marveled at how her mother had eaten the fruit in order to be like God when she was already like God, created in his image. Now the girl stared up into the tree. Had the serpent come back? Was he trying to speak to her? Don't look all scared, the voice said. I'm over here. Then he dropped to the ground. Cain! She shrieked, flinging herself into his arms. Cain, I'm so glad to see you. We didn't know what had happened to you. Nobody's seen you in so long. We didn't know if you were dead or alive. Then she burst into tears. I've missed you too. You were always my best friend. I've been living to the east of here, in a land I call Nod. I've built a small settlement. Now I came back to see, well, to talk to you. Oh, I'm so glad. I've missed you so much. Are you going to stay? No, I will never live in this settlement again. You know that. She nodded, brushing her tears away. Sheena, I want you to come with me. You are not a little girl anymore. We can start our own settlement and our own home. The young woman glanced around. But what about Mother and Father? What about the rest of the family? I guess that's something you'll have to choose, he said. I can't return here. So if you come with me, I guess you'll be in exile too. Sheena stared at the ground. Do you still worship God? In my own way. She smiled to herself. Still in your own way? Cain stared at the ground. Yes, I guess I'm still a rebel at heart. Sheena's guardian edged closer. No, he whispered. By joining Cain, you'll be a rebel too. Think about it, Cain persisted. If you stay here in the settlement, you'll just be Mother and Father's little girl. But if you come with me, you'll be the mother of the new settlement. You'll be queen of the city we're going to build. What would she do? I could barely look, yet I couldn't tear myself away. Wait here, she said after a few moments. I'll get my things. Her guardian and I exchanged glances. We both felt ill. This was going to be a painful recording assignment for me, perhaps worse than it had already been. 800 years later. The woman approached Eden's gate. Tall and beautiful, she walked with a regal step, yet there was no spring in it, and she carried a walking stick. Her clothes had been expensive at one time, but were dirty and travel-worn now. White streaked her long hair, her eyes were dull, and her face lined. She stopped in front of the altar by the gate and gazed at the two cherubim still guarding the entrance with their sabers of light. Slowly she knelt before the cold stone altar. God of my father, Adam, she whispered.
I bring you nothing. I have no lamb. My husband has died. I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and yet none of them worship you. I was queen of a grand city with art and industry and civilization and violence and murder and unhappiness. Now I am an old woman, and I have left all that. I have come back here to see if you still want me.
She paused and swallowed hard.
Is there any coming back? I always felt that you had offered Cain a second chance by not allowing anyone to kill him. I always felt you loved him and cared about him. Do you feel that way about me? Is it too late for me to worship you?
An old man stepped out of the shadows of the great tree near the gate.
Sheena,
he asked.
Is that you?
She turned.
I am Sheena.
He reached out his arms.
I am Seth, your younger brother. You are welcome in my home. Seth, you look so different.
For a second he did not know what to say.
Well, so do you,
he finally managed. Shaking with laughter, they fell into each other's arms.
Welcome home, Sheena,
he said.
Our parents have both died, but they always hoped you would come back someday. And for now, I will provide you a lamb for a sacrifice.
Someday, I thought to myself, God will provide the lamb, and Sheena will be covered with God's forgiveness, just as her parents have been. The two cherubim at the gate smiled at the brother and sister walking back toward the settlement.
This broadcast has come from the book Survivors of the Dark Rebellion by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark the Recording Angel.